joining the State of the Black Student Genius. My name is Imijah Smith. Please call me Imijah, Community Queen. We are here today with a wonderful panel of key leaders focused on Black achievement and thinking about liberated education. What does that mean? What does that look like for our Black community? I want to start with the land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge the land that we are zooming on, sitting on right now in the office in the space we're at for the Duwamish and Cochalish tribes who have the first people to tend this land. Also would like to, who have tended this land and who continue to tend this land and live in community with us and alongside us. And also want to acknowledge the Africans who were brought here and captured and enslaved, who were forced to work the land and also build the country. So with that said, I want to also acknowledge the support for this event today. King County Equity Now, thank you for all the technical support and outreach. Colorful Communities, thank you for supporting and bringing this together. And Reclaiming Our Greatness, thank you for your planning and entity to make this event happen. And I'm naming off organizational names, but there's people behind the scenes that really bring this together. And these are grassroots people, families, parents, and community advocates to bring forth such great opportunities to learn together. Yes. So we have a wonderful panel and a brilliant lineup. And I wanted to go ahead and say to those who are watching live, who are on the Zoom, to please, you can throw something in the chat, like what does liberated education mean to you? This is being recorded, so we will share the recording after. And then this is a great opportunity to learn of ideas of what we can do in our homes, in our community, in our educational surroundings and environments, but also opportunities to connect with the community and what they're doing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Brent Jones. I've had the pleasure as an education advocate and parent in Seattle Public Schools to see firsthand the leadership of Dr. Brent Jones and really stewarding and bringing forth, of course, standing on the shoulders of those before us, strategies and policies that were focused and tailored towards Black achievement. A key person with regard to the strategic plan that's currently in Seattle Public Schools that focuses on Black male achievement, and definitely key to really showcasing Seattle Public Schools nationally in terms of how we have accomplished some of the goals that we have accomplished. Seattle Public Schools has a long way to go. They know when I step up in that space, there's accountability to be had. But nevertheless, I always want to acknowledge the leaders who are there, who are doing the work steadfast for our community. So without further ado, Jones, Dr. Jones, welcome. Thank you as our new superintendent of Seattle Public Schools.
Well, Maja, it's my pleasure. I enjoy working with you. I appreciate your advocacy. I appreciate you being a teacher. I do also consider you to be a queen. So thank you so much for creating this opportunity for me to share with you and be in space and community. And so one of the things you asked me to maybe present is kind of my vision and where we're going. And so I want to kind of center what we're doing around some key folks that are on this call and are leading work at Seattle Public Schools. And so I am very optimistic that we have the right people in place and we have the right goals. This is really about how we can meet the outcomes that are driven by community and families. We have Dr. Mia Williams, Dr. Keisha Scarlett, and they have the brilliance and the focus to develop the right and powerful strategies for advancing these community-driven goals, wants, wishes, and desires. My focus as the superintendent, as being led by our esteemed board member, Vice President Brandon Hersey, my sole purpose, I believe, is to create the conditions so that students can thrive. And when we talk about a liberatory education, we need to start with the premise that our students are going to thrive. We're just not meeting a minimal standard, but we have the audacity to be wildly optimistic around what our students can do and where they can go. So I want to give you 5 points as I'm entering into my third day in the superintendency, what I think is important as we move forward. So one is around well-being. And I think the well-being is around creating the climate, the culture, the conditions for health and safety and the spirit and feeling of belonging. Our students need to be in a place where they can be resilient, they can take risks, they can fail and understand that this is a learning opportunity. And to support them when our students encounter situations that could be discriminatory or racist, our system needs to be able to respond quickly and efficiently and comprehensively so that our students can get back to well-being. And we need a collective well-being, healthy adults serving our students, well adults serving our students. I don't believe students can be served well if our adults aren't well. So the other thing, number two, I believe we need to, like I mentioned, is create the conditions for thriving. And that's our whole system needs to be focused on creating the conditions for thriving. And like I mentioned, not just barely making it to graduation, not just barely getting a C grade, but being absolutely ready for college and career and having post-secondary options. We need to operationalize this concept of Black excellence. Our students need to be Seattle ready, internationally ready. They need to be able to really think about how they're going to be competitive in their chosen field, in their area of interest. Are they going to be great citizens, serving, understanding what it means to respect elders and to respect where they come from and to be, again, a great citizen. And then finally, they need to have self-identity and become self-actualized and just know who they are, being comfortable with who they become and who they're becoming. Number three, what I'm hearing from families is that we need responsive and clear communication. So our families can know what they can do to be advocates for their students. Our operational systems need to be consistent, predictable for families. It's really about customer service and follow-up. So if a family taps in and wants to know what's happening with my child, they should be able to know what they need to do. And Elijah, I'm gonna give you credit for this one. You taught me that one. That's how important that is. Number four, we need an interesting and curious curriculum that's culturally responsive. And let's start with Black studies and ethnic studies to get that going. So I think it's important for our students to be engaged and to feel like they have something to look forward to when they come to class that's relevant to their experience. And number five, recruitment, retention, and support of educators and principals of color, particularly African-American male. We have a focus on African-American males. We need African-American male teachers, educators, and principals. And we need to have a plan not just to recruit them, but to retain them. And to retain them, they need specialized, targeted support. And so this will continue the momentum that we have. And you're right, Elijah, I think we've teed up the right things. I think we have the right strategic plan. I think we have the right leadership in place. Now it's time for us to execute and implement what we've aspired to do. And so that's the vision. That's how I'm entering into this space. That's how I'm entering into this role. And I appreciate the opportunity to be in community with all these robust leaders and community members on this line right now. So without further ado, I'll pass that over to, I think, Director Hersey, but I'm gonna pass it back to you, Ms. Elijah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to share out loud. I'm really excited that you're in the role that you are in for Seattle Public Schools. I mean, I do believe I'm a fierce advocate in education with the warrior spirit, and I'm so serious about it.
Yes.
And so when I say that I'm excited, I'm excited about the opportunities and the potentials for the students in Seattle Public Schools, because there's these things, like you said, these right things have been teed up and been into place. But in particular, when I think about liberated education, right? It's really about liberating the mind, because these institutions have been miseducating not only Black people, but really all the students, because the stories just need, the history is not, it needs more to be spoken to. And we have a panelist, Mr. Delbert Richardson, who's going to speak to that. But I've seen you in real time understand the welcoming environments. When we say keyed up, like, I understand your commitment and your investment in those type of things. And I really was excited to hear you share around the getting creative with the curriculum, because that is really important around, you know, the liberated spirit and the liberated mind. So I just want to say thank you for providing us your time, because I know this is your first weekend. And everybody's probably on your heels for a little bit of time, a little bit of FaceTime. So thank you so much.
You asked, and it's you, and this is important. So I wanted to respond. So thank you.
You're welcome. So now I would love to transition this over to Mr. Brandon Hersey, an educator, teacher, and also a director at Seattle Public Schools. But once Mr. Hersey came into the community as I have known him, I have not been disappointed. You know, the leadership is genuine and authentic. And I'm happy to say this at this time in front of the world, whoever sees it. And would love to hear more from you about how you introduce yourself and what you think about liberated education. The one thing I wanted to highlight that really I appreciate is you did a community invite during this, when COVID occurred and the remote learning, and asked people to come in with you to read books, right? That would be relevant to our Black community. So I was invited into that, and you know, that really rests on me and says a lot about your commitment to liberated education for our Black students. So without further ado, I'd like to pass this over to Brandon Hersey.
Oh, thank you so much. I certainly don't deserve that introduction. My name is Brandon Hersey. I'm the Seattle School Board Director for District 7 and Vice President. I'm also running for re-election. So if you see my name on the ballot in November, I hope you'll support us. But I just want to give a moment to appreciate the breath of fresh air after Dr. Jones spoke. Let's just really take a moment thinking about what a year we've had over the past 12 months and how exciting and liberating it feels to have a visionary come in and be able to really bring so many integral pieces together in a way that we haven't had yet, right? And I think where, I'm most excited is that in the school district now, I believe more than ever, we have everything that we've been asking for. We've got the triangulated leadership of Dr. Jones, Dr. Williams, and Scarlett, and Dr. James Bush. And then we also have myself on the board, and there are many other of my fellow board directors who are committed to creating an anti-racist institution with a pro-Black agenda. And so really what that says to me is that playtime is over. It is time, because we have everything that we need right in front of us. And so what that really means is, do we have the political will as a system and as a board to get these things done in the interest of our children? When we're talking about well-being and when we're talking about curriculum, as a second grade teacher, I know firsthand that our Black students are thriving in their homes, because for the first time, they don't have to come to a school building to get their learning and also worry about all of the systematic racism that plagues them on a daily basis. So as we're moving forward, we need to recognize that our parents, especially our Black families, have always been the experts on their children, especially in terms of what it takes to educate them and to get them to where they need to be. So we need to take these things that we've learned from the pandemic and apply them to our normal operations as a school district, right? So when we're talking about liberated education, the role that I play there is bringing my expertise from the classroom and the mentorship from community queens and kings like Amijah to create sound policy that actually supports Dr. Jones's environment to make sure that our babies are getting what they need. And what I really, again, just want to drive home is that we are at a point of triangulation, right? Where we have all of the right people in the right places and people are ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work. I'm just incredibly excited about what we're going to be able to accomplish over the next year. And I invite everyone who's listening to come along on this journey with us.
Thank you, Brandon. I love how you just bring it real. I love how you, you have these positions, right? As an educator, you have these positions. in a system that oftentimes we have to wear a mask. And I appreciate how you bring your authenticity forward in that journey.
Hey, I learned it from you.
Okay, well, I guess I'm a great teacher then. So I would love to transition this to an opportunity to share with Dr. Gary Kente Perry, an anti-racist organizer, professor teaching at Seattle University, but a great community advocate and just community person. When he say family, I believe he means that. When he says family, I feel it. And so I appreciate that so much of just your leadership in the community. But would love to hear you share more who you are with our audience, but also share about your thoughts about liberated education, what that means to you. Thank you.
So welcome, and thank you as well, Sister Maja, and all the other dynamic folks in the community who helped to organize this gathering. I'm really grateful for the invitation, but also just to be in community, to have the conversation and to learn from each other means so much. And I think someone said, it might have been Dr. Jones, when some people ask, you don't even hesitate. It's, yes, I'm there. And so you are definitely that person in my heart, in my life. So thank you again, Sister Maja. And again, for folks who don't know, I'm Brother Gary Kente Perry. In many ways, I feel like Seattle, especially the Black community, you all took me in some 16 years ago now. Some of you know I'm originally from Louisiana. That's my home. That's where my people are mostly. Moved up here, as Sister Maja said, start working at Seattle U. Bought into the vision without doing my homework. And I quickly realized all that sounds good on paper is not always how it is in reality. And so I'm so grateful, particularly folks in the Black community here who gave me places to land. And one of those places would be the anti-racist organizing of the People's Institute here, which is really how I see myself showing up even in this conversation. It's really been, we talk about liberation education. I think there's very few models that I have encountered that can really surpass the brilliance of the anti-racist organizing of the People's Institute. Really, I feel like they've been my best teachers amongst many other folks. And I'm thinking, Sister Maja, to the question about liberation education, really echoing a lot of the points that have been made so far, and really resonating with some wisdom I've heard an elder say, and many of us have heard, right? That without a vision, right, the people will perish. There's that kind of saying. But I'm also thinking about the co-founder of the People's Institute, a Black man who's now an ancestor, Dr. James Norman Dunn, who unfortunately left us too soon due to the racism, of course, of our medical system here. But his brilliance still lives on. And he always would say to folks that if you don't have a vision, any road will get you there. And as I think about this conversation, I put it in the perspective of the vision, yes, is there, but the strategy is also needed to be tightened up. And that strategy for me as an anti-racist organizer really needs to be rooted in principles. And again, that's why I say liberation education must also be principled and strategic. And it must be rooted in organizing. Because history would tell us, I think, that we as a people, we've received nothing through policies and programs. It's only been when our communities have been organized. And so as I enter the conversation about liberation education, even the visioning process, as we're doing now, is an organizing effort, and it's anti-racist. And as a part of the People's Institute family, and me being accountable to that broad network, the principles that I draw on a lot, many of you may be familiar with, are part of our anti-racist organizing principles. And I think they work so well with the vision and the work of liberation education. One of that, which I've heard already, is that liberation education, by definition, must be anti-racist. By its very definition, there's no way around it. And it can be a lot of other things, but if race and racism is not at the heart of it, then we're not working on liberation education. We might be repeating some missteps from the past, like multiculturalism, diversity education, inclusion, but that's not always liberation. So I hold that principle very dear in how I try to move. How is liberation education, really leaning into being anti-racist, which also means we have to call out anti-Blackness, because that's very much the pillar, one of the pillars of how racism works on these shores. I think about the principle of history, which many of us on here would say Sankofa. So grateful to see the elder, Brother Richardson. Liberation education, right, must work from that principle of how do we learn from and honor history, and not just as a text or a class, right? It has to be a living history. That's why for me, I think about my earliest educators were really poor folks back home in Louisiana, in the bayous where I grew up, who had wisdom that no university could ever compete with. And these were folks, you know, probably didn't speak the Queen's English, probably had all kind of mispronounced words, but I tell you, their wisdom was priceless. And I'm grateful that the history, that oral history that our communities carry, that was held with respect. And I think liberation education must also bring that in. It has to bring in that rich oral wisdom. Some people may say that common sense wisdom that sometimes institutions might look down upon, but actually it's going to get us all free if we really respect it. You know, in the Institute, we talk a lot about culture, and I heard that shared a lot as well. I love, as our superintendent, Dr. Jones, mentioned, how do we create some inquisitiveness and some curiosity? And part of that means we have to bring our full humanity into the process. You know, what I've learned just working with older young folks still, if they ain't feeling it, they ain't gonna be coming to nobody's class, and that's the real. And I think that also speaks because what they're not feeling is a sense of their humanity. It's feeling like business as usual. It's feeling dry. It's feeling stale. And so when the Institute says we have to share culture, what I hear in that is, how do we create an environment that really lifts up our humanity? Because I also agree with Dr. Jones and my other organizing community, which many of you are connected to, the Village of Hope. We also believe we are working to create communities where everybody thrives. I think the essence of liberation education works towards that. We all thrive. But in that process of thriving, that means we also reclaim our humanity. And I see so much of that, even in my own journey in these quote unquote halls of higher education. You become dehumanized. And liberation education for me allows us to reclaim that humanity, celebrate that. And that's why culture is so important. I'm also thinking about our principle of accountable gatekeeping. You know, this process right now feels like that on steroids. It's very often when community calls people like the superintendent and your school board members, that they come, and they come out of respect, not out of obligation. You know, that's accountable gatekeeper. And to me, that's essential to the work of liberation education. And that's not just the teachers, it's everybody in the institution, from the custodial workers on up or down, however you look at that matrix. How are we being accountable? And by accountable, we're thinking about how we shift in power and following the leadership of our community, especially Black folks, if we're going to talk about being anti-racist. And so for me, accountable gatekeeping, which is about power shifting and transformation, does require us to be in authentic relationships, not as individuals, but as collectives with our community. And I'm also thinking, just as I think about other principles, Sister Maj, and close with my thoughts, you know, I'm thinking also about our conversations around liberation education must be connected to our healing. And as anti-racist organizers, we often put that healing work a lot in how we heal from our internalized racial oppression. And that's both the inferiority that has been pumped into our particularly Black bodies and other people of color before we were born, and the inflated sense of superiority, especially that white folks have been pumped with, which has us doing some really pathological things, which really don't allow us to heal. And, you know, we can talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome and post-master syndrome too. We forget the great doctor didn't just look at what happened to those of us who were enslaved, but who was doing the enslaving. And that healing work has to be not just in a class, it cannot be a seminar, it has to be throughout the entire education process. And it must also include families. I think that's the other connector to how liberation education transforms the institution. Yes, the baby's got to be educated, but children have families. And if our families are not being brought along on the journey, then we run the risk of this kind of brain drain we do, you know, pluck the good ones out, leave the rest behind. So liberation education must also help families heal from the racial traumas. And I think ultimately what we're working towards, I believe, Sister Maja and others, through liberation education, is not just creating communities where we all thrive, but the markers of that will be where we all have a sense of our collective power and our leadership is fully developed and realized. I think those become our indicators, not test scores, not what people can say or what they can quote. It's really, do we have our sense of our power, and is our leadership being fully realized? And I would just say, for me, we are not waiting for that. I agree so much with Brother Hersey. We're not waiting. The answers have already been here. The workers are already here, and the models are already in practice. Must give love and respect to the Black Prisoners Caucus, who will be 50 years old next year, started at Monroe State Reformatory here in Washington. Who would have known that powerful organizing base within our prisons would be still transforming not just the prison, but even our communities in this conversation? Because through their teach, which is taking education and creating history, teach, which is really their BPC university inside the prison. When the institute say, we ain't educating y'all, it's a waste of money, they say, okay, we'll do it ourselves. That model has been around now for years and must lift up the brothers and the sisters of the Black Prisoners Caucus and their families who supported that work. I think about the work, of course, of the Village of Hope. That's my place. I see liberation education happening. I think about Holgate Street Church of Christ. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. There's a lot of models. I think about our beloved Life Enrichment bookstore. Rest in peace, Sister Vicky Wood. There was so much liberation education happening in that bookstore. You were blessed to get a taste of it. So we have the models. We've been doing the work. I just feel as anti-racist organizers, we need to make sure that our strategy is clear. The vision, of course, is clear, and that is building power in our people, in our communities. And I think that's when liberation education is at its finest. So thank you so much, Sister Maja and others, for making space for us to get clearer about what we're doing.
Oh, I don't even know how to come back from that, but thank you so much. It was very much necessary and needed. Very rich and very deep. And what is coming out of what's calling me in my spirit is to really think about that liberated education that our African people, right, and descendants of African people have been doing for centuries. When you really think about the times when, you could really lose your life in not to educate yourself, to learn the language as you're constantly being refused to hold on to your own culture and language, and how our people would figure it out with the landers, whatever, teaching themselves how to read under such harsh and inhumane conditions. That is liberated education right there. And so when I think about you sharing around the Black Prisoners Caucus, very similar to say, we're going to teach ourselves, we're going to figure this out. When I think about the families out here right now in remote learning or in that institution anyways, it's like, this is what my family needs. This is what we need to thrive. We're going to go figure out how we're going to supplement, actually build on that. And then liberating our minds to say, no, we've been doing this. Why would we even downplay ourselves for this other mediocre, watered down version of what we believe is a quality education? And so in saying all that, I really would just want to say thank you to all the panelists previous, but that was a great anchor, Brother Kente. That was a great anchor for us moving forward. And so transitioning to this liberated education, the model that is out here right now, that we are doing right now, like the transition over to Mr. Delbert Richardson. Been in an elder in the community, a vetted elder, because he educated me on what a vetted elder needs to be, but a vetted elder who has watched me grow, my family and connections, who I've seen firsthand in not just Seattle Public Schools. This is not about Seattle Public Schools. This is about Black achievement and liberated education, but to see the work that he has brought to all of us in the community and see it just spread, his interest, his creativity, his call, his purpose. Just want to honor you, Mr. Delbert.
Thank you.
Without further ado, go ahead and take it on and share.
Thank you. Thank you, Maja. And thank you for the people that spoke before me. And, on my screen, how these Zooms and Teams are, they rearrange the squares like Hollywood squares. You'll know who is where. But, I had Dr. Brent Jones in the middle, Dr. Keisha Scarlett on the right, and Dr. Mia Williams on the left, all in the same row. You see what I'm saying? Spirit is in the house for me, right? Because I've had an opportunity to work with all three of you personally and intimately in a way to where I can call you family. So I want to say welcome to all the panelists, and I am honored to be called an elder, because you hear me say this all the time. Just because you at a certain age don't mean that you're an elder, right? And I saw a post that said something about old people make mistakes too, right? Old people old people are stupid too, or something like that. I said, oh my goodness, right? So I don't take this honoring lightly. We'll make this kind of quick, because those of you that know me know I teach history and I'm an educator. And when I heard, thank you, Sister Maja, for inviting me. When I heard this term liberation, I just started getting excited, because I'm not sure what liberation means to all of you. But let me just read to you what the definition that I pulled up. It says, liberation, the act of setting someone free from imprisonment, slavery, or oppression. Release, I put unshackled. Okay. The second one is the state of being liberated. I put in feeling liberated. I think it's so important, right? So for me, a liberated education primarily means that we must want to get back to our African roots, plain and simple. We are our ancestors' greatest dreams. And believe it or not, the roadmap to empowerment, I want to say that empowerment, that means from the inside out, has already been laid out. But as the great Dr. John Henry Clark said, what transatlantic slave trade did, it disrupted this lineage of brilliance that are in all of us, and we need to do the Sankofa and go back and get it. So one of my primary goals is to be a resource to assist us realigning our culture through an Afrocentric paradigm. I heard the term healing, and I love that. And I think Dr. Perry was talking about trauma, but I teach a lot about the enslavement period. I don't call it slavery, call it the enslavement period, right? Because that implies that it's just a segment in time. And I operate from a belief that it's almost impossible to heal if one doesn't know the nature and the impact of the injury, right? And so some of that comes down to us going back through, in a way, through an asset-based lens to see that we were never slaves, we were enslaved, right? And to understand that there's this resistance, resilience, and this remembrance in both the enslavement period and Jim Crow that far exceeds anything we can ever imagine, because we'd have to experience it. But we're on the shoulders of those individuals right now. So I always ask myself, what's my responsibility to honor those, not so much behind me, but those that are in front of me and the ones that are unborn. So as I'm on the Zoom here, I'm excited that Dr. Jones is in the house. But check this out. I wrote down every point that he wrote that he said. So there's some accountability to what he wrote down, right? Because if we don't hold each other accountable, then we're really showing love to each other. I think that's so important. So the last thing I want to say, I heard someone say transformation. And I love that word. Change is kind of like this here, right? But when I talk to students, I talk about transformation and I give them examples. So transformation means that a butterfly can't go back to a caterpillar, okay? Cannot. A frog can't go back to a tadpole. And you know that pickle, it can't go back to a cucumber. So the reality is we must want to transform in a way that regardless of what comes our way, which we know racism, white supremacy is not going anywhere. And the last analogy, some of you guys might not know about this guy, this white guy named Superman. But one of the things I used to like about Superman, the model, is that when they shoot bullets at him, he used to bounce off his chest, right? Where our children must be empowered in a way to where when that racism and that white supremacy comes their way, it just bounces off. And they know that's not their stuff, right? So the goal is to help them understand that they have the strength to respond and not react. And those are skill sets that I think we all on the screen are constantly working on that muscle as we speak right now, because the system that we're part of is very tricky, is very crafty, and is constantly morphing. But the one thing I want to believe that we're positioning ourselves right now to be that force field for our children, that we will not let them be impacted, because we're going to create a healthy container. So when they come into our school, they're going to feel good about themselves. And when they leave, Dr. Jones, they're going to feel better when they leave. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Did you want to share anything more about the unspoken truth in the American History Traveling Museum?
Well, no, but I will. I'm pretty humble when it comes to this work, right? Because I have a national award-winning traveling museum, and I do the work rather than talk about it. But I firmly believe the success of SPS is going to be around having community-based organizations coming in to assist that journey of transformation. Because if we believe that systems and structural institutions like Seattle Public School, Kent, Auburn, all of them are really going to have our baby's best interests, we need to really pay attention to that, because the system was there long before we were here. And 9 chances out of 10, to a certain degree, it's going to be there. But how can we undergird, how can I support Dr. Jones, Dr. Williams, and Dr. Scarlett from a community standpoint, do that heavy lifting that in some ways, I'm not going to say they're limited. It's just that there are skills out there in the community that can come in and do the heavy lifting for the babies, the teachers, and the community. And I'm one of them.
Thank you. Thank you. We always got to shore up the models. We got to shore up the models and let not only the families know, but the institutions know the genius of what we're doing in community and what's working and what needs to be continually resourced. So thank you. I wanted to bring in a mother. We have mothers, we have families on this panel. So I want to bring in some voice around that light. So I want to transition to Khadijah Toms, a mother, education advocate, family advocate around family, people of disabilities, and the intersectionalities of all the issues really that our Black community faces. I consider Khadijah a community queen similar to myself, because she does a lot. And she is a community expert that I go to when I need support in the education system for my children. Without further ado, Ms. Khadijah Toms.
Thank you so much, Maija. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a participant in the panel discussion. So I was thinking about these questions, and some things that came to mind for me as I'm educating my own children right now during remote learning are centering the family's vision. So I know that schools have their own vision and kind of what they expect and what they want from students and families, but I think it's important to really take leadership from families and to really center what families need and what their desires are in learning. Also, I think it's really important to be rooted in culture, and kind of like what Delbert and others were saying, the fact that a lot of the educational models that exist right now are white centered. And in order to really truly liberate ourselves, we have to go back to indigenous cultures, which is African culture. And I think one thing that has been very freeing for me as a parent is to always have that information and education and knowledge and wisdom available in community. So what I lack, I have Brother Delbert, I have all the other people I remember when Lynn's, the bookstore, was open, there were so many people and so many resources that were available in the community and still are. And what I learned there in community, I actually center at home. So what's been very empowering for me as a parent advocate and someone who really deeply cares about Black people and liberation for Black people is self-determination. And being able to have materials, curriculum, content, and strategies that center Blackness, that are African-centered, that are rooted in our strengths, in the way that our students learn best, and that are accessible. I do a lot of work in the disability community, and what's really been highlighted, especially during the pandemic, are just the accessibility issues. Like, not all students can learn remotely, not all students are able to go in person. So if you're not able to learn through the laptop, and you're not able to sit or attend or to even access work in the way that other students are, you're basically you're not learning right now. And so what I have found that has been very helpful for me is to just go outside, learn in the environment, and to be very flexible. And to actually, the educators that I'm working with and collaborating with for my son, basically I'm doing my own model. So I'm teaching my son what I think is important. I'm pivoting when it's emotionally draining, when there are things that come up in the community, we're talking about it. And I'm educating my son about it. I'm looking to people in the community that are leading around issues that are important to Black people and to us, because I'm raising Black children. And I think it's important to be very innovative. And I know that people talk about STEM programs and things like that, but they don't really go back to the essence and the root of all technology, which is African-centered. So I would really love more conversation and more discussion and knowledge building and foundational knowledge around the African-centered or African contribution to technology, to all STEM fields, learning about the multi-geniuses that exist within our culture, and not just having like physical bodies and just, promoting images of Black people, but really a deep dive discussion and learning around what we're truly contributing as Black people in terms of all the different educational models that exist. And I think it's important to see families and community members as assets. And I know that in my experience as a parent, I haven't been viewed in that way. And people tend to view parents as not knowledgeable. They don't have any experience. And even if they don't necessarily have a degree, sometimes people think that they don't add value to discussions, that they don't know what's best for their child. So I think if we're talking about true leadership and freedom in the educational space, then we need to see families as leaders, as knowledgeable, and having true expertise, and respecting all families, regardless of what they look like, how they present, how they speak. It's important to just honor the fact that every single family wants the best for their child. And regardless of where their child is, that means if their child is in juvenile detention, if their child is gang involved, whatever the circumstance that that youth or that family is dealing with, that we're all valued and we all have place. None of us are disposable. And I think in order to have true liberation, we have to understand that all of our liberation is tied together. We can't have some students that are succeeding in these educational models and then others are disposable as we know, through the school to prison pipeline. So in order to really have healing around that, we need to tell the truth, and we need to provide investments and actual funding that looks at emotional healing and cultural modalities for that healing, not just go to white-based talk therapy, but really resource and do sound investments for models, cultural models that work, that there are people in the community that are doing excellent work, and just have those resources available. And also, I would say that education is continuous. It's not just what's happening during the school day, but a true investment of things that are happening in the community and bringing that forward and making sure that families are connected to those resources, and they have full opportunities to take advantage of those resources so that their children are prepared to lead and not just seat fillers and just moving through the system. And when they're exited out of the system, they don't really have any plan, any true opportunities, but we're able to create viable opportunities through business and making sure our children are financially literate and truly capable to lead in the next generations.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Oftentimes I hear, I thank you again for your leadership, Khadijah, in community and with families. Oftentimes we hear that notion of the school to prison pipeline, and we're not here to focus on that narrative. What I heard you say, we got to focus on the school to liberation pipeline, the school to success and sustainability and vitality, right? That's what we are producing and we're promoting, and we want to pour into for our children. Thank you so much. I would like to transition to Dr. Keisha Scarlett. You came into this panel, and I just wanted to say thank you. As we kind of like peers, and I kind of feel like our families are families just because we've known each other since we were really young. You were my younger brother's era, kind of. I'm with your sister, and my sister's with your brother. So it's like watching these families grow together has been amazing, is much needed when you're building a sense of community and a sense of self and seeing each other. Thank you to your parents, to your family, and I'm thanking mine in the same way. What I wanted to say thank you for is there was a opportunity in the community within Seattle Public Schools where they were looking to put together an anti-racism policy, and you help create something on your team around a pro-Black, pro-Indigenous. And so I just want to highlight a little bit of that with you in terms of saying that language in there, to me, epitomized the conversation that we're having right now. When you read the language, it was like your body could feel what that experience could possibly be like. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit in your leadership role, what liberated education means, let me know. But please do. Without further ado, I'll pass the mic.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, the privilege is all mine to be part of this esteemed panel. And I know there's more people watching that I hold in high esteem. And Queen Imijah, thank you so much for welcoming me into this space, into this Black space, into this home space. And what Imijah talked about, our families and our experiences, that's what the CD and Garfield will do for you. So brings us together. So Keisha Scarlett, I've grown up here in Seattle, multi-generational member of the Seattle community. And I was thinking about liberation education. And so I'm declaring May Cite Brilliant Black Women month, and it could be year. So I'm going to cite a bunch of brilliant Black women as I share some different aspects of my thoughts, that these are not necessarily my original thoughts, but come from brilliant Black women who have been breathing life into the work to pursue liberation for our Black children and for our Black people. And so one of the first people I want to cite is Sister Sprinna Vasa Brown. She is the director of Camp Elso, and it's a Black-led outdoor education program in Portland, Oregon. And she and so I'm replacing Portland, Oregon with Seattle, Washington. But in her words, she said that she personally rejects the narrative of Seattle, Washington Seattle and Washington as white space, as it erases all the contributions of Black, Indigenous, and Brown folks of all of our communities, all of our contributions to the city and state. And so I declare Seattle Black space all the time. And I think that that's a starting place for us, because when it's Black space, then we know it's not just education, it's about property ownership, in wealth building as a community as well, and the self-determination that Sister Khadijah Toms just spoke about, so citing another brilliant Black woman. What we do know is that Black culture is the archetype for innovation, distinction, creativity, intelligence, spirituality, and healing, and that Black space for our children in education is what liberatory or liberation education is. It is uncontained, it is unrestrained access to the world around them, just laying there for them to claim. It is a Black space where everywhere their minds, their bodies, and their spirits touch is a Black space for them. It is unencumbered by the weight of the white gaze and centered in clear view their Blackness. It is about building a salient and accurate identity, an identity as a protective factor. And I'm quoting Sisters Marjan Heru and Mayet Dalila from Black Star Line, as they sat and poured into me about the village learning model that is parent enrolled, and their focus on supporting Black family caretakers who have been taking care of their children through education and also throughout pandemic as well. So as we build liberatory or liberation structures that need to be born through our collectivist approaches, that I'll say that Brother Perry had spoken about community organizing, that everything comes through us organizing together, that we have authentic community partnership where we let the voices of our people say what is good, what is not good, what they need, and what they need to have stopped for our children. And also the last point is futurity. This radical reimagining and freedom dreaming that Dr. Bettina Love speaks about, where we give Black people the confidence to survive into the future and continue to construct a world that doesn't exist. So a few highlights for my role as the Chief Academic Officer in Seattle Public Schools is my ongoing partnership with my sister, Dr. Mia Williams. I could spend all day quoting all kind of brilliant things, but I'll let her say some things for herself. But we work in strong partnership with each other. We are each other's co-pilot all of the time. I always tell her, I was her assistant principal intern, so I would say I'm always her AP. I'll always be the AP, she'll always be the principal. But Dr. Williams in the AMA, the work that we're doing, in the work that she's doing, and had the brilliant Sister Khadijah Toms and Elijah Smith to engage with our families, to hear from them during our remote learning, the ways that they're engaging our young kings also, and I won't steal all her fire, but our children are being spoken of in some ways that doesn't make me feel comfortable, and they're being used all the times as shells for white supremacy. And one shell for white supremacy is the whole construct of learning loss. I reject learning loss as a construct, as a chief academic officer and as a member of community, because our babies were learning. They're always learning, and we need to focus on, and they watched adults. That's something that they did in a way that they probably never did before. They watched adults in new ways in their homes, watching how their families navigated these situations. They watched adults in the media, the white supremacy, our people out in the media, out on the streets protesting as well, and then the uprise in the white supremacy. They watched their educators on their computer screens in new ways. Imagine you're just looking at people now. We just look at each other in our faces in ways that we never did. They picked on new cues, so many new cues that they realized that all of a sudden, if they turned off the screen, that perhaps they could be outside of the white gaze, the white gaze that provides weight on them, and that keeps them constrained and keeps them from learning, but less about their learning, their trajectory, because we know that learning is not just that we are all on a trajectory. And so I looked up the word trajectory, and it's the path followed by a projectile flying or an object moving under the action of given forces. Our students are on learning trajectories, and it's our job to provide all of the supports that they need to be unencumbered so that they can fly and move on this trajectory as well. And so I need all of our community to reject the idea about this learning loss. They've had schooling loss, they've had time and reprieve from the white gaze, but there's not been learning loss. They are not static. Individuals were another brilliant Maxine McKinney de Royster speaks about as if they're a cup that you're pouring water in, and then water can just pour out of it if you keep pouring more in. Anything worth remembering that they've ever learned, they kept it with them. So the things that may be poured out were things that they shouldn't have been learning at all because they have new insights. So lastly, I just want to highlight the opportunity of a lifetime for me, and a shout out to the brilliant Manal Al-Ansi, who is our Director of Racial Equity Advancement in Seattle Public Schools, and who also leads as Director of Integrated Curriculum. We're building a Black education program, y'all, and it's really going to be built. It's not built yet. We have Sister Anita Koyer-Mwamba is our new Black education program manager. And we're building it from the values and interests and priorities of students, families, and communities that will center the expertise of our community scholars like Brother Perry and like Brother Richardson. One of our first partnership is with Brother Richardson and some other Black community scholars as far as the Sankofa Academy. That is our starting place for this work, our first effort on top of our citywide Black studies program that we have been launched across 11th grade. And so I want you to hold me accountable. So the words that I said, hopefully this is recorded, and please hold us accountable in SPS the same way as you said you hold Dr. Jones and his words accountable. I want you to know that I am you, you are me, and I love you all, and I love all of our babies across our city. And I want to send one last shout out to Sister Bayonne Coleman, Principal Bayonne Coleman, and the work that she's doing with the Rainier Valley Leadership Academy. Such a brilliant woman who doesn't have all of the extra structures around her that could provide some assurances, but also are encumbering for folks like Dr. Williams and I as we work in larger institutions. And we all need to rally around what she's doing. She's doing dynamic work. I had the privilege to spend some time with her young scholars and be interviewed by one of her brilliant babies. And I want you to know it was the highlight of my entire year of time within this. So I thank you all for this time for me to be able to share. Thank you.
Just wonderful. I just want to give some snaps and some finger claps to you, Keisha, Dr. Scarlett, but also to the women that you uplifted in your presentation. Just like Black Star Line, thank you for the motto. Thank you. The leadership that's there. I could say more, but it's not about me and the time. I'll take it up too much. I would like to transition and following what you said, Dr. Scarlett, with Bayonne Coleman, CEO and principal at the Rainier Valley Leadership Academy. Without further ado.
Thank you. It's a lot of brilliance to follow on this panel. So it's funny, I don't get nervous with when I have to talk to other folks. You know, I always get nervous when I have to speak with community because these are the folks who should be holding us accountable to the work that we actually do. And we should be doing the work, and so we should be nervous in these situations. With saying that Rainier Valley Leadership Academy is an anti-racist collaborative community school. We're really focused on supporting scholar leadership to really think about how they can critically analyze information and really be the change that we want to see locally, nationally, and globally in our world. We serve middle school and high school. And for some folks who don't necessarily know the history of Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, the school was created in 2016, and it was overseen by a white organization, a large national charter CMO. They closed down 2 schools in community spaces, Tacoma and Kent. that caused a lot of trauma, as you know, and just being overseen and governed by a predominantly white organization who doesn't understand what community actually looks like is traumatizing in and of itself. At that point in 2019, there was a huge shift and transition that happened, and community basically reached out and said we need to do something different. We had some community conversations around what we wanted to see the school look like. There was a very clear understanding that it needed to be an anti-racist school. And so I went through a hiring process and ended up in this space to really be able to support community, having been someone who lived up the street from the school. And if I probably would have actually had this school being present when I was younger, my mom probably wouldn't have had to sacrifice our generational wealth to send us to school. And I think that that's what a lot of families are doing currently, is trying to figure out how to educate their scholars and having to make sacrifices around time that they're able to spend with their children, as well as like the generational wealth to be able to make those decisions. So in 2019, we went through this long process with the commission to have a lot of conversations. We really stepped into the space of really what it means to be a collaborative community school. So as a collaborative community with educators, with community partners, with our elders, with scholars, with families. I know Amijah came to a couple of them, but we really had a conversation around what it actually looks like for us to be a collaborative community school and what that really means for us to be anti-racist. So in January of 2020, we went to the commission, we presented our ideas, and we received independence. There's still a lot of work to do. But what we landed on is really focusing in on 3 pillars that are our foundational practices. And the first one is leadership. And that really means that we're looking at neurodiversity. We have a lot of scholars who are called ADHD, autistic, and labeled in various ways. And we really come from the guise that leadership comes in all forms, and that we really have to recognize that our scholars who have been labeled are oftentimes the brilliant ones who sit in those spaces to be able to have us really lean into the space of understanding how to solve problems in a completely different way. So I can look at a problem one way, and a scholar who's been deemed or labeled as ADHD can look at that problem in a completely different and beautiful way and teach me something in those situations. And we often don't look at neurodiversity in that way. And so we really step into that space of leadership within our school around neurodiversity. We also step into that space of understanding what culturally for our ancestors leadership has actually looked like, really understanding that leadership is not about the person who sits in front of the room, and really understanding that that also means that leadership oftentimes means that you're standing alongside someone. It means that you're holding people up. It means that you're standing beside people. It may mean that you're not even present in the room at all. And so understanding how folks who support in leadership around budgets and understanding policy and the people who are writing those things you may never see, but those are leaders who sit in those spaces who can make decisions about life. So we really support that space of what leadership looks like. We also really lean into the space of helping our scholars understand civic engagement, and that they are the change that we want to see right now, and that they're not too young to actually start this work. Our second pillar is around anti-racism. And so anti-racism for us is we just come from a very clear, straight cut, very authentic, we don't sugarcoat it. Racism is murder. And we have an understanding in our organization that racism is murder, and we do not allow for adults to sit in spaces and we don't make it all nice and beautiful to say, you know, microaggressions and biases. It's racism. And when folks are exhibiting that type of racism in front of our children, they do not deserve to sit in front of our children and to exhibit that. And they definitely don't get to slowly murder our children trying to work out their own racist, anti-racist practices in those spaces, right? It's like you need to figure out how to do that somewhere else. And then maybe you might be right for a position later on when you get through that, and maybe you never will be. But that's one thing that we don't play with in our organization. So we explicitly hire for anti-racist practices. We take folks through multiple different areas as far as like Socratic seminars. We have them read specific articles. We do a lot of work around that. We also believe in cultivating the adults in the spaces. So we do a lot of PD. We've really shifted the focus of what it looks like and means to actually be an anti-racist educator, understanding that every single scholar who sits before us, every single family that comes in through our doors is a customer. And it is our job to provide customer service to our families and to our children. And when they say something, we need to listen. And if they're not happy, we need to listen, and we need to collaboratively think about what that actually means to support families in that space, because what we never believe is that schools should just be plopped into communities. As a collaborative community, the community is a part of the school and the school is a part of the community, and there's no separating that. So we have to be held accountable to that. So there's no, a child came into my classroom and they're, I'm teaching, and if they don't learn, that's on them. If they don't learn, then that's on the adult. That child is a child for a reason. And they're supposed to be getting that instruction from us, the people who went to school, the people who took that time to do that. And if we can't do that, then we don't need to sit in those spaces educating them, because it's not their job to learn. It's our job to make sure that we provide information so that they can critically analyze it. So that's really around that anti-racist piece of things. As a collaborative community, we really think about how do we actually bring community into the school and make sure that they know that they own that space. And that they have a right to be in that space. And so before the pandemic, we used to have elders who would come in and just sit and be and talk to scholars when they went back and forth, and volunteers and families who would come into the school. And we really believe in that transparency about who we are, so that schools need to be held accountable, and we need to be held accountable to our community, specifically in those spaces. So really, this is really about revisioning what education actually looks like and understanding what transformative power actually looks like in those spaces. As a charter school, we are the only global majority-led charter school in Washington State. And we're happy to say that we're 100% Black and we're 100% female as far as executive leadership. So we are the 2% that make up global majority-led charter schools in Washington State. Part of the reason why that's really important is that we know that there has been a huge appropriation of the anti-racist movement, of pro-Black and pro-Indigenous terms, and that white folks have stepped into that space and said, we're doing this work, and they don't have nobody on their team that actually looks like that. They don't understand what it means, and they are popping up schools and organizations in our communities and really capitalizing off of our Black and Indigenous populations and our brown populations as well. And so there was actually a study that was done by Civic Atlanta, and it literally just encompassed about 3 months of time in the pandemic. And in Atlanta, there were 321 organizations who received about $18 million just in that course of that 3 months. And 74% of them were white-led organizations. 96% of those organizations were specifically serving solely in Black communities. That's a problem, right? Like within our organization, we understand that in order to really be transformative, we need Black and Indigenous leaders at the highest levels of executive leadership, which is, we're beginning to see that change even happening at SPS, which I'm hugely excited about, because that is what supports with the educators who step into those spaces to actually feel safe. We have educators who report to us like, I no longer have to look over my shoulder. We have scholars, over 75% of our scholars, closer to 80%, actually say that they feel comfortable talking to their teachers about racism. Like, that's huge. And so we've done a lot of work around what that looks like. And some of the examples of that is when we first came in, 30% of the teachers were global majority. And we've been able to increase that to just about 80% of our teachers are global majority, with over 40% of those being explicitly Black, to support our community. In Washington State, that average is only 14%. So we're far exceeding what that actually looks like. In addition, our board was less than 20% global majority. We're happy to announce that our board is now 90% global majority, with actual people from our community, with the majority of those folks, again, over 80% being African American and community leaders within our communities explicitly. In addition, our leadership team had me on it as a principal at that time. I was not CEO, I was the only one. And we've been able to change that to be 80% of our leadership team is Black. 98% of our scholar population is global majority, with over 75% of those being Black. So it's really important that we sit into this space as an anti-racist school to really talk about what this looks like and what it means. In addition, we really lean into the space of decolonizing curriculum. And so what that means for us is that, for example, all of our middle schoolers are receiving African studies. All of our high schoolers are receiving ethnic studies. For English, our middle schoolers are reading Stamped. For high school right now, they're reading Monday's Not Coming, but and they also read books like Code Talkers to actually talk about the Navajo Native Americans who actually supported with being able to end world wars based off of their expertise around language and the knowledge that they had that oftentimes is shielded from mainstream information that's given to our scholars in spaces. And so we also are working with a curriculum writer right now who's writing our social studies curriculum that's explicitly talking about pre-colonial and post-colonial nationally, globally, et cetera, to be able to lean into those spaces to really have real conversations. We have teachers who have beautiful pictures of Indigenous folks and African Americans and Mexican and Hispanic Americans in their classroom so that when scholars walk into the space, they feel and they know that this is their space explicitly. So those are just some of the examples. We really support our teachers with coming from IA positions and like getting into programs to actually be teachers in those spaces. And we really just sit in the space of really supporting what it looks like to do adult social emotional learning work to cultivate the adults in those spaces to really understand what it means to do this anti-racist work. And so those are some of the things. I feel like I'm leaving out a whole lot, but I think when we talk about the impact of liberated education, what that actually comes forward to, we have a lot of folks who want to look at metrics and we look at holistically what the children are doing in our building. And what we can say is that through this pandemic, we've had between 94 to 97% attendance with our scholars. We really believe that that has to do with being a liberated education, being anti-racist. We have 51% of our scholars who are on honor roll. That was with no C's. Which is huge. And then as far as like our behavior protocols, et cetera, we actually center those around Sankofa. There's this idea that, discipline, whatever, like we call it behavior. We understand that children are supposed to be immature. They're children. That's where that term comes from. They should make mistakes. They're supposed to be in safe places where they can make mistakes. And we provide that for them as a part of liberated education so that they can actually learn from those mistakes and take what they've learned and then move forward and be even better from it. And I think, so that's really what we're doing. We're really leaning into that space of what it means to actually be liberated and to be anti-racist. And we're very unapologetic about that. And we're very honest about what our growths are. And we continuously even look at what it means to decolonize our budget to make sure that the money that flows from education flows back into our community to also support those spaces of generational wealth.
Wow, the power in this space right now. It's a feeling that I'm getting, but I cannot really be expressed with words. Thank you, Bayan. Thank you so much. We have 2 more panelists to go, and I would like to transition us with Dr. Mia Williams, the Director of the Office of African American Male Achievement. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I mean, my heart is filled, man. So I just want to just talk about the humbleness of being in the space of looking in the mirror and seeing all of the people who know that it's our moral obligation to do well by our babies. And I'm just overjoyed. So, and just the words here have been phenomenal. And I just also want to give a shout out. I know that my partners, the Kings, are on the call today listening in the audience for Team AMA, and just shouting out that we know that nothing's about us without us. And so just getting the opportunity, Queen Amijah, to be in this space, thank you so much, so that we understand how we support our babies in thriving. It takes all of us. And I heard my sister Keisha talk about how holding us accountable, but I want to also put that back out to each and every one of us. We all play a role, and we all need to be accountable to our babies, our kings and queens, as we want them to thrive. And so I just wanted to just say that and put it in a space. And I'm originally from Houston, and I just love that when I walked down the street, Miss Mary was going to say something to me. Everybody was going to say something to me. So I feel like in our community, we must own that and keep that. And if those who know me, that I always think of our babies as if they're my own, and I'm going to treat them like that. And the babies just do not love. They'd see me in the community And they would say, why is she always, I said, it is my job. I mean, I feel like I was born and anointed to make sure no matter where you're at, that I'm always going to want the best for you. And so I just wanted to say that. And I'm just blessed to be with you all. I wanted to also just talk about, when we talk about liberation, I just really want us to be able to show up as our authentic self and to really be able to be in space. And I say that for the adults as well as our kings and queens that we have in our system. And it is I feel like I was chosen to be in this space, and Queen Amijah knows that the space we were in without even knowing, but she just knew my heart and she knew what was going to happen. And so I just want to thank Queen Amijah and Queen Khadijah for coming along with us to start with our listening and learning tour. But for us, when we're talking about liberation, as I am a mother, as I am a community member and a leader in the system, I just want to say that unless we're dismantling and being more accountable to, when I say building new models, and I want to just talk about that, it's hard to rebuild on a foundation that was never built correct in the first place. Schools were not designed for us in mind of our kings and queens. And so we get the privilege every day to move in a space where we are trying to be drivers of systemic change to reconstruct a system that is built off of what our kings and queens need. And so the number one thing I would say, when we talk about Black excellence, our kings have already said it. They said when they're asked that, they said, you just don't see my Black excellence. I'm inherently filled with Black excellence. And they said that I don't have to be the president. I don't have to be an NBA star. How about a person who's moving through my community every day, doing the best I can to give back and continue to grow and move? And so for us in our office, the number one thing that we do is we're centering the voices of the kings and the Black family and the Black community to make sure that we're building on what we're going to do to get to a liberation, so that our students no longer have to conform to a system that was not designed for them. And so I think that it's important for us to make sure we keep front and center as we have our African American Male Student Leadership Council to hold us accountable and to name things. But our hope that we've been in the listen and learn with our kings, Kevin and Adam and Will, they've been in space talking to hundreds of kings, asking them about their experience and really helping them, supporting them along understanding who they are and whose they are. And I think that that's what we do not get within our system. And it's a shame, it's horrendous when we see these kings in the 12th grade saying that they never had opportunities through their schooling to really interrogate their cultural identity and who they are. And most of them talked about it was only their families or the community where it's at. But we need to change that. It needs to be a part of who they are throughout their whole time, from prenatal all the way through wherever their college and career movement that they move. And so ways that we're doing that is just really important to make sure that we're hearing them, but it's not enough to listen. So after our listen and learn and our focus groups with the kings, it is important that we are now doing research. We have our preliminary findings of themes, but what our next step is we're going to go back out in space with the people that participated in their voice to make sure that we heard them and make sure that they can add value to that. Because one of the things, as people talked about, is we've been marginalized and we haven't gotten what we need to make sure that we can thrive. How do we to name, and as we move through those listen and learns, it's hard because all that intellectual property that was just brilliantly shared with us, not that we wanted people to relive their dehumanization or the racial trauma that they've experienced throughout the harm that Seattle Public Schools has inflicted. But we want to hear that, we want to claim what we deserve, what we didn't get. So how do we go back out in the community to make sure we heard what they said and make sure that we can put specific things on so that we don't let whiteness determine what we thought we heard, you know what I mean? And so so as we build in that way, we are using that to develop a multi year plan of really being the heartbeat of the system. So how do we get to be strategic innovation through every parts of Seattle Public Schools and in partnership with the community? And as we wrap up, our guiding foundational strategies is looking at culture. How are we affirming our Blackness every day for our kings and queens and seeing them for their brilliance and what they bring in, their currency and their gifts that they're bringing in every space, and supporting that as they move through the system. And then what are the conditions? And so whether it's little p, big P, so the little rules, whatever it is, how are we creating access with those policies that we're creating and not creating more barriers? And how are we examining that so that our babies can get what they need? And then our third C is that we focus on is the culture responsive practice and the workforce. So how are we, every adult in our system, I don't care if you're the carpenter in Seattle Public Schools, how are you living out what culture responsive practices should be to support our babies in thriving? And so we have a program, one of our offerings, and we have our Academy of Writing Educators. Thank you, Dr. Scarlett, for launching that, and we've been thriving. Right now, we have 32 Black males, predominantly all from the community, that will be teachers in Seattle Public Schools soon and supporting that. And we continue to move in that space. And I was a person that was working with the program where I had a Post-it note just from my experience of being in the buildings. And this is my 27th year. So I just wrote Black males' names down that I saw their greatness, that they need to continue to pour into our kings. And many of them are in that program now. And I'm super excited. And we're going to continue to do that, how we can have representation. As I talked about the mirror when I started, how do we continue to provide more mirrors for our babies instead of windows as they're looking out into whiteness? So we want to provide the mirrors of all the excellence that's on this call, out on the attendees, to make sure that our babies have that. So that is one of the things that we've continued to do. And lastly is, what is our community connections? We, again, as I started off, holding us all accountable, yourself, me, the system. And I love that David Sarju said, we gave over the permission to educate our babies to the system. We need to take it back and own it and make sure that our kings and queens get what they deserve. And so how do we do a collective impact? There's so many talents and gifts. And instead of being competing against each other, let's come together, because we all have this dream for our babies to get to be their best selves at whatever that is, and pushing them to be able to be a part of their productive struggle about who they are as an individual. And so I know that Queen Amija's like, yeah, 2 minutes. And I said, it's so hard. I get so excited to talk about the babies, but I'm just so hopeful with all of us coming together. We're going to be, as Dr. Scarlett said, in the right trajectory. We're already on the right trajectory, but how do we see that? How do we see that day that Seattle is on the map because we've claimed it and we've taken back what our babies deserve? And I just want to thank each and every one of you for what you do every day for our babies, and will continue to do. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. You are wonderful and you are powerful, and I appreciate you, and you are a true representation of someone, a community queen also, but someone who's in community with our families, with our babies. And so definitely lean on your leadership. Without further ado, and Erin Bryant, a community queen, mother, wife of mother of 3 beautiful children. I want to give Erin the credit that this liberated education theme is because Erin was part of the planning and brought that to the table. So this has been very powerful thus far. And I just want to credit you, Erin, for bringing that into the space. I want to go ahead and pass it on to you because we have about 6 more minutes left. And I want to make sure I do proper thank yous to the planning and to other community efforts in the community. So Miss Erin, you're on.
Hi, greetings, everybody. You guys say hi. Hi. Say hi, Missy Maija. Hi, Missy Maija. Oh, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Hold on one second. I just want to say, again, just thank you for allowing me to be a part of this process. My name is Erin Bryant Thomas. I'm a wife and a mom of 3 boys, 10, 8, and 5 on Sunday. And their grades, Kente will be 5 on Sunday. And so their grades are 5th, 2nd, and pre-K. And so when Miss Khadijah, Queen Khadijah spoke from a mama to a mama, that really touched me just around how you educate your babies. and just being flexible, going outside. So those are some of the things that we try to create liberated educational experiences for these children. Go ahead, Sid, you can say hi.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sydney, and I'm in the 5th grade, about to be in middle school. And
he'll be going to RVLA.
And I'm a great artist.
And he's a great artist. Thank you, Sydney. All right, y'all, I'll be down there in 1 second. I also want to say thank you for allowing me to have a level of comfortability. At first, I was like, everybody get out, close the door. But just being in this space, Black space, allowed me the ability to just be. So thank you. I organized with the Village of Hope, the People's Institute, Black Star Line, Holgate Street Church of Christ. Who else? I'm a student at Evergreen State College, Tacoma campus, where our dean is Dr. Arunga, and our founder is none other than Dr. Maxine Mims. I have been ushered in a way that just brings me to tears, how I've been brought to all these different beautiful Black African-centered spaces for me to be a better wife and to be a better mother. And so I have to extend my gratitude to all of these, and also the People's Institute. Really, Kente really spoke to the organizing principles. Those very organizing principles have helped me to be an organizer in my own home and to just show up better with my children. And so I'm eternally grateful. You know, I'm glad that everybody got an opportunity to talk about what liberated education means to you. And I'm so excited to see how we all come together for the betterment of our children, because right now in this moment, they need us. As you can see, they need me, they need y'all. And so I'm so thankful that you all are showing up fully present and ready. I am so excited to reclaim. We've been talking about reclaiming. We've been talking about healing. And I'm so glad that you all are taking time to center too on, you know, the healing of our parents and really equipping the parents and the caregivers of our children. And that's one of the things that I love about Black Star Line. They have really helped me, poured into me, equipped me so that I could show up better with my own children, but also as I serve the children in our community. We are no good for our children if we're not good ourselves. And so there's a lot of things that we got to heal from, that we need to equip ourselves with. And like Miss Maya says, become skillful around. And so I'm thankful that you all are taking the time to do that. And please continue to do that. And I don't want to take up any more time, Imija. I'm just so grateful to be here. Y'all join the Village Calls. We meet every Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Message Miss Imija, Queen Imija, she'll get the information to you. But one thing about it is we got to stay connected, get connected, stay connected, and don't leave each other's side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Erin. Thank you all. This has been so enriching for me. I'm constantly learning. And because of you, I am, and because I am, you are, right? Because of each other, the community building, the relationships that we hold. I just want to do a shout out to all the families who are supporting their students right now in their achievement and doing it in innovative and creative ways that are strengthening that liberated education. I want to do a shout out to Africa Town, to the monthly calls and bringing people together to figure out what we can do and what can happen in our own communities. They happen monthly. There's events that are happening. Check out the website. I just want to thank all the leadership. I'm just so grateful. Thank you. Thank you to King County Equity Now, Reclaiming Our Greatness, Colorful Communities, and all the wonderful people. Have a blessed day.